So welcome everyone to today's webinar, Investor Q&A with Cyclion. I'm Anna, I'm one of the campaign managers here at Birchal. Just before I introduce our incredible founders here, Phil and Stephen, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm beaming in from today. Birchal is based on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Now, Birchal is working with Cyclion and an upcoming crowdsource funding offer. What is crowdsource funding, or CSF, you ask? It's also known as equity crowdfunding. It's a relatively new form of fundraising in Australia, and it allows startups, small businesses, and growing businesses to raise capital from a larger number of smaller or retail investors and wholesale or sophisticated investors through an online platform like Birchal. Now, instead of seeking traditional funding, from sources such as banks or venture capitalists, companies can turn to the general public, often their communities or passionate supporters, to raise money in exchange for shares or equity in their business. Birchal Financial Services will be the licensed intermediary for the offer. The information and discussion in this webinar is for informational purposes and should not be considered as advice or a recommendation to invest. Please do your own research. Always consider the offer document and the general CSF risk warning before investing. That's available on birchal.com, which I dare say is how you've found yourselves here today. A little bit of quick info about how today's session is going to run. The team are going to take us through a presentation, which will last approximately 20 minutes, all about Cyclion, their journey, the incredible stories behind these founders, and a little bit about why they're here raising capital, which I'm sure you're as excited to hear about as I am. We'll then switch to a Q&A session. So you'll notice at the bottom of your screen, there's a little Q&A button or a bubble. Please pop your questions in there throughout the process, and we'll get to your Q&As at the end. And we are recording today's session, so if you do have to jump off, we get it. Everyone's super busy. Never fear, we'll send around the recording afterwards. It will be on YouTube. Feel free to share it with your friends if someone couldn't make it. Absolutely, please spread the word about the incredible work the Cyclion team are doing. I'm sure they'll be thrilled if you did. Now that is enough from me, because you are not here to hear from me. I'm thrilled to introduce Phil and Stephen from Cyclion, and over to you.
Oh, thanks very much, Anna, and thanks very much to Birchal as well for looking after us so well so far. It's also great to see so many people attending today. I'm Steve Burns, the co-founder, and with me today is CEO and founder Phil Major. I'll chat for about the next few minutes, and then Phil's going to come in and talk about the Cyclion tech and the business plan. And then, of course, we just mentioned Q&A follows after that. And you can actually click a link for us and get a one-on-one session. You may be able to do that as well without any problems. So I'm only new to the climate industry, and I personally thought I understood that there was a problem, but I didn't realize how big that problem was until I kind of entered the industry. And then luckily these days, there are literally thousands of climate tech ventures that are chipping away at the problem, which is great. But I think the really big ideas are what's needed to deliver the results before it's really too late. And Cyclion, I believe, is one of those really, really big ideas and truly has a global reach and can make a real difference against pollution. And that's one of the reasons I got involved. You've probably seen this stat everywhere, and it's certainly all over our videos, but only 9% of recycling is done around the world. I always wondered, well, what happened to the other 91%? And I found out recently that 50% goes into a landfill, 19% is incinerated, and the rest goes to this uncontrolled disposal, which I believe is the most unenvironmental process that you can actually have, which concerned me. And living on the ocean my whole life, I notably that over 6 million tonnes goes into water, and almost 2 million tonnes goes into my favourite place in the world, which is the ocean. And contemporary recycling is largely ineffective to date, we believe, and expensive, as Phil will go into a bit later on. And our initial focus will be, by the way, on Southeast Asia, where the need is greatest. But because of all this, then in March this year, the UNN stated that humanity is on thin ice and needs to make dramatic changes by the year 2030. This is a pic of Padang Badang taken in Bali in 2003. The surf is usually a bit better than that. That's one of the best left-hand breaks probably in the world. Like many Aussie divers and surfers, I've been going to Southeast Asia, Bali, Philippines, Thailand for the last probably 35 years now to enjoy the pristine and beautiful beaches. And this is kind of what it looks like these days. If you guys have ever been across to Bali recently, it's very, very disappointing. This is what you'll see, especially in the rainy season over there when all the plastics are washed out into the ocean. And to be honest, it's very, very, for me, it's unsafe to even swim there anymore. And if you're a surfer, some of the best places in the world are in Bali, but then, you might have to put up with this. And for surfers, any surfers out there, it's like when glass turns to plastic, and only surfers will get that one, but you'll know what I mean. These guys are my favorite sea creature, the turtle, and they ward off sharks by turning their back on them. And they're fearless animals, but they think plastic is jellyfish, and they love jellyfish, of course, to eat. I actually took a picture of a loggerhead turtle about 4 months ago when I was over in Bali that had washed up on the beach dead. And it was actually too graphic to actually put the photo on for this. So I took this one as well. Speaking of graphic content, yes, plastics even killed a mermaid recently on a Bali beach. True story, and it's such a waste, as you can see, the poor love there. But look, jokes aside, there's a book that I really enjoyed reading, and it was by Simon Sinek, and it's called The Start with the Why. And one comment in that book says, without the why, there is nothing, and without the why, you have nothing, no matter how much money you make and how successful you become. So I guess you could say that this is the first why that I invested in Cyclion, but there's a few more to follow. The real why for me is when Phil sent me a book. It was actually an online book from about 2004-5 called The Garbage Book. And The Garbage Book is an account of the waste situation in the Philippines, which is dire. This was on another level. Parts of the book showed some of the poorest kids in the world in Manila living inside these garbage dumps. And there's over 250,000 of them. And I must admit, when I saw this, I got a bit emotional. And great things can come from sadness and anger. We all want to be successful, but more importantly, we really need to change the path we're on, if not for you, for these kids. And at that point, I found my true why. I was convinced we needed to be part of the solution. I need to be part of the solution. So I became the first investor in Cyclion Energy. But that wasn't the only reason I invested. In our videos, we state that saving the planet is great business. It's true, but don't take my word for it. In this Smart Company article from August, Larry Fink, BlackRock's billionaire CEO, said, climate tech is going to create the greatest investment opportunity of our lifetime. If you don't know BlackRock, it's the world's largest asset manager and investment advisory firm with almost $10 trillion under management, US dollars. He further said, without a short window to act and trillions of dollars on the table, the world is hungry for climate solutions. So that was a good why for me as well. I believe it's a great investment. You see, the global waste to energy market was valued at over $32 billion in 2021 and is set to grow to over $68 billion by 2030. That's huge growth by any account, and it's a huge industry, and it'll even get bigger. And what are the main drivers of the industry? They're very, very obvious. You're running out of places to put waste, number one. Number two, everyone's working on better solutions like we are. So people are accepting these solutions better. But the big one for me is soaring energy prices. I mean, we all know what's happened with electricity and fuel over the last couple of years. It's ridiculous. So that was my third why, and it made me feel better about investing again. 2 months ago, I asked Phil if Cyclion could treat the current Aussie stockpile of 12,500 tonnes of plastics and how long it would take, hypothetically. He calculated that in 2 weeks, a Cyclion plant could convert Australia's entire stockpile into 2 million litres of diesel, which could fill the tanks of over 30,000 cars at a much lower cost and much lower emissions, which was my fourth why. And there's probably 3 more whys than I needed, but those 4 reasons are why I invested to be the first investor in Cyclion. Moving into recent partnerships and media, we're very, very proud to announce our relationship with SeaWorld Foundation. My first job was a lifeguard at SeaWorld back in the 1980s, and I was 15 years old. I worked there for 6 years, and then I went to uni after that. We used to do our swimming training in the dolphin pools, and when the new rookies came in every year, we never used to tell them, they used to just go swimming in there and see a fin come up behind them. So it was actually a lot of fun back in those days. So imagine my delight when we partnered with SeaWorld Foundation. These guys are amazing. They're on call 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And last year, they rescued 600 marine animals from entanglements, injuries, and beachings. We're also, so it's fantastic to be involved with these guys. We're also the major sponsor of the ocean cleanup around Australia, which is also have SeaWorld's involved. So we've been in the media a little bit as well, more recently in online media. And then Phil, of course, has been all over local press. And we expect that with the announcements that Phil will make in this presentation in the next week or two, that we'll probably get an awful lot more media. So I'll introduce you to Phil, the founder and CEO of Cyclion Holdings.
Thanks so much, Steve. Great to meet everyone. What I may do is just start with a brief introduction of me. So if you were to look at my career, it pretty much spans over two sectors. One is services. So I was actually a policeman. I was a pilot officer in the Air Force. And then after that, I actually moved into business for the last 23 years. Came up with a foundation system, which I patented in the UK. Actually built that business from scratch to sell it to a multi-billion revenue international corporation. And they actually hired me back as a national business manager, which gave me corporate experience. Then in 2012, I came back, did my MBA. Came back to Australia, did my MBA, and actually started in waste to energy in 2014. At that time, we built a business and had a pilot plant in China. Was actually going to have a project in Brisbane, which was about a $100 million project. But this was 4 years after I'd started, was still pre-revenue, and there was delays in government funding, and unfortunately that project didn't go ahead. So I've learned a lot from that experience. Was really encouraged to not give up because something needs to be done about the waste. And although I lost everything at that time, it really inspired me to make a difference. And so I actually set my mind to researching what the current technology is, which is liquefaction. So one of the things I learned from this is we need to be able to get to a commercial project quickly. 4 years is just too long. So we actually set out to actually secure a commercial project. And that actually meant that we also did need to look in the Philippines because establishing a business in Australia is very challenging. Whereas we were lucky to actually be introduced to a conglomerate, a very large conglomerate in the Philippines, who actually had a ready-made project. So they were able to organise the waste, they were able to organise the location, the fuel agreements, the funding, the location, and the approvals. So essentially they provide all of that, and we can focus on what we're good at, which is the technology. So this has actually led us to an LOI, a letter of intent, that's about to be signed very shortly. It's gone through all of the solicitors, and it relates to a $105 million US project, which we're expecting in the medium term to come to fruition. So well before the 4 years that I'd experienced previously. So we were up against various technologies before we were chosen for this LOI. And I'll actually explain why we were chosen. So in particular, one of the technologies was incineration. So incineration, as most people say and understand, involves burning. It's around 800 degrees centigrade. There's some variation around that. And there's quite a lot of preparation still required for the waste before it goes into the burning chamber. So there's lots of problems with that, not the least of which is that it's large scale and it's actually very, very costly. In fact, in Western Australia, there's a gasification system that's just under $700 million. So it's very significant. Whereas with Cyclion, we can actually, we're at 310 degrees, so much less, low pressure, and many other benefits which I'll go through. In fact, on this slide, you'll see that the foundation of our technology is actually this liquefaction process. Now, it may seem very technical, this slide, and in some senses it is, but just think of it like a special mixture, or you'll see in a moment, I refer to it as a washing machine. And in this washing machine, we actually go through different cycles. So instead of transporting waste around a huge facility, which can also have lots of troubles in terms of blocking pipes and those sorts of things, we actually introduce these special fluids into this washing machine. So just like at home, you have different cycles. In this instance, we would have, and I'll show you a video in a moment of the process, but the rubbish truck will actually tip all of its contents into this washing machine, and we'll go through various cycles, such as, because most people take out their rubbish in a plastic bag, which is a problem for recycling because they need the contents. Whereas we would run through a plastic process, and then that releases the contents of the bag. We then run through a biomass process that liquefies the food scraps and the leaves and grass cuttings and other biomass. And that exposes more plastics, which we can then run through another cycle of to liquefy that. And we just keep doing these cycles until all you have left in the bottom of the tank are the inorganics, which can then be recycled. Anyway, I'll talk a little bit more about what happens after that, but this video is most probably a good introduction or overview. Okay, we're missing the sound. But that's the rubbish truck tipping into a trommel, which essentially that trommel helps just remove any inorganics like glass and dirt. Goes into this washing machine, and as I mentioned, the special catalysts go in and liquefy the plastics and biomass at different times. There's no one catalyst that does everything, which is what we've developed. Low temperature, low pressure, and environmentally friendly. So it's not using acids or anything nasty. That then can be, that produces oil, which can be separated into fuel, or can actually be used to generate electricity. And the good thing about this is to raise the temperature up to what we need, obviously it produces an exhaust gas, but that gas, instead of just being released into the environment, goes through algae tanks. And those algae tanks then convert the carbon dioxide into oxygen. So essentially, and it also absorbs the carbon. So, and that's what the algae uses to grow. So, and then we can recycle that algae, use it for fertilizer, use it for animal feed. So we've just really tried to do everything we can to reduce our carbon footprint. And to give you an idea of what a commercial project, you may well say, well, how can you go from where we are now to doing a major project that's 105 million US in the Philippines in a number of years? The reason is because it's a modular construction. And this is where we really differentiate ourselves from other technologies. You'll see here that there's, in fact, 18 modules. So in the medium term, we want to, we aim to establish a 50 tonne per day, essentially pilot plant, which we would locate in the Philippines initially, and then ultimately bring it into Australia. But if you imagine this huge project, instead of having to design a massive facility, essentially all we're doing is repeating that 50 tonne a day module 18 times. So that's how we can scale up quickly and safely, because we would have already proven that a 50 tonne a day works. So hopefully that makes sense. So where to from here? We've, as I said, this has been a learning process for many, many years. There's been a lot of research that's been conducted, and we're very lucky with partnering with great universities, which is about to extend as well. We've done our patent application. We've done IP Australia have done global searches. So we're confident in relation to having novel features to this technology. And we've done a proof of concept done by QUT in Brisbane. So we've actually done mixed plastics, mixed waste, all in together. And we have liquefied it and produced oil at that temperature and essentially proven the process. So from here, part of the reason why we want this crowdsourced funding is because we want to move on with optimizing the process. And we also want to establish some plants at a university here, just small scale, but it then creates the stepping stone for us to get to a 50 tonne per day module. And then, as you saw, once we get to that 50 tonne per day, the commercial applications would be taking off. So how does Cyclion make money? And essentially, there's two different components. One is Cyclion Holdings, which is what's currently being offered in the crowdsource funding. And it's almost like a franchise that we provide to clients such as governments or very large corporations for them to operate a project like what you saw earlier. So we would make money through the sale of Cyclion processing plants to those projects. We would make money from selling the special catalytic fluids, and would also organise an ongoing royalty or some sort of joint venture with those companies so that we have ongoing funding. And those projects are designed to last 20 years. Plus, also, as we improve the technology, there's opportunities for further income from that. The projects themselves, I'm just conscious of time, I want to keep moving. The projects themselves actually benefit from getting paid to receive the waste. So governments often are paying a certain figure to dispose of the waste, and instead of it going to landfill, goes into one of these projects. And then because we're producing a valuable commodity, either in fuel or electricity, the project gets paid for that as well. And as I mentioned, we actually recycle the inorganics. So if you imagine in your rubbish bin, there's most probably lots of metals that end up in there, and they are in particular very valuable. So by going through our system, it actually helps recycle better, because traditional recycling starts at the front when, if you imagine an electrical wire that's covered in plastic, it's very, very hard to recover that metal because of the plastic. But if you imagine in our situation, we've actually we've liquefied that plastic so we can recover it more fully. So how will we get to where we're aiming, which is that first commercial project? And the short answer is not just the technology that's modular, but it's actually the team. And we've got a great team that both advise generally, but also advise in country specific. So whether that be China or the Philippines or Indonesia, we've got a great team. We've actually also just brought on environmental and governance advisor. So in addition, we have key partners, corporations such as Arup. So Arup in particular, very, very large company, incredibly well established. These photos are some of the projects that we're working on currently or have done in the Philippines. So they've got an existing reputation. They know what they're doing. They've got the relevant contacts, the local knowledge, all of those sorts of things, which as a technology company, we couldn't do by ourselves. So our strength is to actually work with companies such as this. PwC is another one. And then, as I mentioned, research. There's other universities that are coming on board, including we want to actually link with University of the Philippines, because if we've got a project there, we value transparency. So we actually want them to attend site and actually check that everything is as we expect, and that all of our environmental emissions we're heading towards as close to zero carbon as possible. So essentially, that's the presentation, and I'll hand over to Anna, who's going to handle any questions. But like Steve said, we're more than happy to have a conversation outside of this if you have any questions that we aren't able to get through today. But we really value your time in giving up your time to listen to us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Super interesting. I'm sure everyone will agree. It's a fascinating solution to such a significant problem. So really keen to get into the questions. We've had loads come through. So if you haven't popped your questions in, please pop them in the Q&A box. Just a little heads up, I may do them a little bit out of order, so don't fear if I haven't quite gotten to your question yet. We'll do our best to get to everyone's, and of course, if we don't quite have time to get to all the questions, because I have a feeling some of them might be quite in-depth, I'll share the Q&A with Phil and Steve afterwards, and they'll be able to reach out to you directly. So Damien, to kick us off, has asked, why does Cyclion need crowdfunding? Is there something fundamentally risky that is not attracting other traditional investors?
So the problem with waste to energy, and one of the challenges faced by waste to energy companies, is often they're actually quite capital intensive. So Steve's got a lot of experience in terms of fintech, where returns come in quite quickly. So it's a very different scenario. So we actually need quite a lot of money up front. And obviously, the more you put in, the more risk there is. So venture capitalists in particular want a lot of evidence. So the benefit that we have with crowdsource funding is that we can have many, many people involved who are able to put in whatever they feel comfortable. So in turn, there is a risk which is outlined in offer documents. We've obviously tried our best to minimise risks, and also provide sufficient information. But if we have, say, 1,000 people that put in $500, $5,000, then it adds up to a huge amount of money, which enables us to buy the equipment that we need without any one person or any one company being exposed to a huge amount of risk. So hopefully
we're certainly not the typical crowdfunding company, probably due to the sheer size of the venture and the global reach to some degree. But, you know, even though our customers aren't going to be you are definitely going to benefit from what we are doing. And that's what we really believe. So we're taking everyone along for the ride that believes in this cause.
And also just the word that's been spread so far, you know, obviously this is a big undertaking that you've actually made in investing in this campaign, and the amount of people you've already been able to reach with your message and share and, you know, get them excited about your vision. It's a real benefit of a crowdsource funding campaign as well. So we've got a question here from Francesco. They've asked, what are the major problems and needs that Cyclion resolves for customers? They've also asked, do you have a customer persona?
I might answer that in reverse. So the customers, the direct customers are large companies that have access to waste. So that's our customer. It's more business to business. Obviously, ultimately, the customers are retail customers as well. So if you look at producing fuel, I think Steve touched on it earlier, is that unlike being controlled by OPEC, where the prices can fluctuate hugely, with our system, we're able to actually have a relatively stable cost, stable sale price, so that ultimately benefits retail customers as well. Sorry, just remind me of the first part of the question. I got sidetracked on that.
All good. What are the major problems and needs that Cyclion resolves for these customers?
Sure. So if I take it from a waste management point of view, one of the main things that's dealt with is that pre-treatment. And what I mean by that is a lot of other technologies, like I said, one of the companies we're up against in the Philippines with incineration, they needed to do a lot of pre-treatment preparation of the material, because if you look at the screen behind Steve, rubbish is a mix of all sorts of things. So for us to address that, it's not just how much plastics or how much biomass. It's also how much moisture is in there, because you can't make fuel or energy out of water. So, and that's can vary city to city. It can vary season to season. So in other words, when you're doing pre-treatment, you've got to get rid of that moisture. And so that takes energy and power, and that can impact your bottom line and the time it takes to produce things. So I know I'm going into a bit of detail, but what I'm trying to get at is this washing machine actually does revolutionize things, because from a project waste management point of view, just putting it in there and bringing it up to 310 degrees and doing these cycles, we can easily accommodate the variation. The last thing I'd say is that we can actually help customers on the retail side. So once it's gone past the waste management to fuel or electricity, we can benefit customers there in terms of helping to control prices. And the last thing is obviously in terms of the environment, which is actually our biggest motive, is to actually stop all of these plastics in the ocean and in landfill, and actually do something positive to reduce carbon.
Amazing. We've got a question here from Luigi. They've asked, does the system cope well with the contaminated waste problem, i.e. can it take anything?
Yes, absolutely. And touched on it a little bit before, but in this washing machine, the variation and contamination, because we use different catalysts and solutions to be able to treat plastics or biomass, the main difference for us is what cycle we use. So within the washing machine, if there was more plastics, we'd do more plastic cycles. If there's more biomass, we'd do more biomass. And let's say if you take a drink bottle that's got a label around the outside, you can't actually recycle that because you've got glue on that label holding it to the plastic, so you can't recover the plastic. All we would do is we would run the biomass, which liquefies the label, and then we'd run a plastic cycle, which liquefies the plastic. So yes, we can address that problem.
Amazing. Luigi had asked, does the process lend itself to the broken down plastic being reused as plastic, or is it only suitable for energy generation? And is the idea that the algae ponds capture all the CO2 from the waste burning?
Yeah, so they're good questions. We're not focused on upgrading plastics. We're focused on either converting it to fuel or to electricity. And ultimately, actually, we would love it to be going to electricity because fuel's still burnt in the car. And so once we get to a lot of EVs and hydrogen vehicles, then all we'll do is convert it to electricity. And as Luigi has said, that when you say about burning, the first stage, the actual conversion of the waste into a fuel is not using burning. We're essentially soaking that in a catalyst. So it's very different to incineration, pyrolysis, and gasification. And it depends on your definition of burning, but those three all use heat. We use this catalyst liquefaction. When it goes to fuel, so we're saving carbon, but it's still getting burnt in the fuel engine. So yes, we're reducing the carbon massively, much better than drilling more oil out of the ground. But is it perfect? No. It's much better for us to be moving as fast as possible to electric vehicles, and in which case our fuel is used to generate electricity, and the exhaust gases from generating that electricity goes to the algae tanks. And the beauty is that algae grows because it captures the carbon, and we can actually recycle that into fertilizer or animal feed. So we're actually almost getting to net zero.
Amazing. JF has asked, how does the technology cope with a large mix of plastics? Is the fuel produced solely directed to energy production, and can the fuel be traded?
So the fuel can be traded. Yes, we can. We can handle multiple types of plastics, and that's actually one of the keys in dealing with waste, is that you'll have all sorts of plastics in it. Part of our testing has also included PVC, which is really problematic because when it's heated, it turns into hydrogen chloride, which is very bad. Whereas what we do before it gets to that stage is we actually treat it with a catalyst. So it actually nullifies the chlorine in it. So essentially in this mix in the washing machine, there's actually lots of things all happening at the same time. And we've designed the different phases. And this is actually a part of what we'll also optimize is what stage and how long to run things for, so that we can handle all of the different plastics quickly and efficiently, so we can produce the fuel. And that fuel can actually be separated into different fractions. We focus on diesel because I know that we can produce that, and we want to. That's what I know. There's more than likely we can actually produce petrol and even aviation fuel, but there's more research that needs to be done on that, and that can be sold in the open market.
Amazing. We've got another question here from Ina. They've said, your goal of being carbon neutral minimal is admirable. How will you power the liquefaction process in that light?
Yep. So when we talk about producing electricity, there's existing technology. It's another reason why we can grow fast, is because our real novelty is our washing machine, those modules that I spoke about earlier. But in terms of generating electricity, it's called a combined heat power generator. And it's very clever technology. It's actually much more efficient than just a generator, but essentially it actually produces heat. So in the generation of the electricity, you've got a turbine, and that mechanical force actually generates heat. So the engineers use ways to capture that heat, and that can be reused to heat our system at up to 310 degrees.
Amazing. Ina's also asked, for most people, a figure like 50 tonnes per day is hard to grasp. What might that equate to in terms of a city's daily garbage?
Yeah, very, very good. I mean, it really does depend on the city. And one of our goals that Steve and I spoke about many times is to not just be relevant for big cities, but especially island nations. And when you talk about Philippines or our neighbours, Fiji and Pacific, there's lots of need for small facilities, which is why I wanted to do the 50 tonnes a day. But to give you an idea, in the Philippines, just one city within Manila, so not Manila as a whole, can have a million tonnes a day.
Wow.
So there's so much work. And I mean, I've had inquiries with other countries already as well. So once we have the first commercial project up and running, the challenge will be growing sustainably and prioritising the greatest needs, really. But that's also why we're partnering with really big firms, because not only does it deliver this one project, but it helps us roll it out around the world.
Amazing. Ina's also asked, does the garbage being liquefied have a time scale, such as could it process old garbage, for example, a year or older?
Yes, it can. So it's essentially, it would have already decomposed to a certain extent. Obviously, plastics don't. That's one of their biggest problems. And by the way, I've had this question, a separate question around replacing plastics, and we fully support biodegradable plastics. So we're not trying to want more waste. There's so much waste for us to deal with. There's more than enough for us to do. So, so yes, even if it's biodegrading, we can still process it.
Amazing. We've got a question here from Paul. They've asked, for each 50-tonne unit, what's the estimated cost of each unit? And when considering tonnes, how does it compare to EFW incineration?
So the best way for me to answer this, because there's lots of variations, but if I can go to this particular project that we're working on in the Philippines, we represent more than a 30% saving on the capital expenditure. And what I mean by that is how much it costs to actually establish the project. So if it's 100 odd million, you can add 30 odd % onto that, and that's what we're saving. And in terms of return for the project, it's attractive enough for the company to, and this is a large conglomerate, to actually want to sign an LOI with us. So we were much more cost effective. In fact, the incineration needed a much higher waste price than what we did to be financially viable.
Great. Wayne has asked, are you working with governments to get grants or funds globally?
Yes, and there may well be another announcement coming out soon about that. So both in Australia and in the Philippines. I've also had discussions with various banks that are very keen to see waste technologies move forward. So, and Steve touched on earlier, just that there's a high demand or interest for technologies to be supported. But the key is, and this is what I've really focused on, is getting a project up and running. Because everyone will say, look, sounds great, but where is it happening? And unfortunately, you actually have to have a project before you can answer all of those questions. And that comes back most probably to that crowdsourced funding question earlier. I think it was Luigi that said, why crowdsourced funding? Forgive me if it's the wrong person, but this crowdsourced funding wasn't available 5 years ago, really. Or correct me if I'm wrong, Anna, but it is recent, and it's an incredible opportunity now for us to be able to raise sufficient funds to be able to prove it works. We've already done it with QUT, but we do need to scale up before the big money starts coming in.
Amazing. Damien's asked, what are the barriers to entry to another business copying your method?
So there's a few, one of which is a patent pending. So that's underway. And as I said, we've done our global searches. So that's actually key. It was one of the fundamental things that both Steve and I set out to accomplish before launching the crowdsourced funding action. Because if we couldn't protect it via patents, then the effectiveness would be limited. But another thing is, in terms of manufacturing, is we will actually separate the manufacturing of the facility, so the washing machine itself, and the surrounding supporting equipment. We'll separate that from the actual special liquids that we use. So someone could try and copy certain parts of the system, but they wouldn't know it all. So that was another backup. And then the third thing is, it's another reason why partnerships are really important, and working together both with companies like Arab, and there'll be other engineers as well involved. There'll be banks, there'll be governments. So if we're working, we have a very collaborative approach to things, and by doing so, we want everyone to win. By doing that, we all win because we can all do more. So rather than trying to cut people out, we want to use our technology, our patents, our relationships to be able to accomplish as much as possible.
Amazing. We've got a few questions on this theme, so we'll keep going. So JF has also asked how secure, we've obviously touched on this, but you may like to expand. How secure is the Cyclion intellectual property globally?
Yeah, so we've got until February next year to determine what countries we're going to. As mentioned, this is why we actually paid for, we didn't need to do it at the time, but we paid for IP Australia to do the global research. They actually came up with nine documents, or they referenced 9 documents, of which we've got a letter from my patent attorney in assessing those, indicating that we have novel technology. So we're very confident around the patent that claims will be granted.
And Rowan has asked, what regions do your pending patents cover?
So by February next year, we actually need to nominate which countries we want to go into. So we will definitely go with PCT, for anyone that's familiar with patents. That covers over 150 countries. So we will cast the net as wide as possible, because I think that this technology can be applied anywhere.
Amazing. We've got a question here from JF in a stark contrast. They've asked, how much are you looking to raise and what are the uses of funds? I'll just quickly, for anyone who's not familiar with crowdsourced funding, I'll just give a little bit of an intro as to the phase that we're in at the moment. So we're in the expression of interest phase. This is where, the founders, Phil and Stephen, are really going to market and having amazing conversations with investors and understanding the interest in the opportunity. So the actual targets of the campaign will be available when the offer goes live, which will be not next week, the week after. So I encourage you, if you've not already expressed interest on the platform, please do so. You'll be first to find out when that goes live, and you'll be able to access the offer document, which will obviously have all of the financial statements, disclosure and required information for you to make your decision of whether or not to invest. But Phil and Steve, you might want to just quickly touch on, you've mentioned why you're raising and why you're here, but in terms of use of funds, is there some general idea that we could give everyone on the call today?
Sure. There's two main areas that we're raising funds for. The first one, and this is actually the primary one, is to raise funds to provide a pilot facility at the universities. And linked to that is actually ongoing research to optimize the process, because all of that will inform the commercial project, the design of the commercial project. So that's why it's our highest priority to raise these funds so that we can actually build these. It's intended that it will actually be located at QUT. And then the second stage will be to build a 50-tonne per day module.
Amazing. We've got a very good question here from David. They've asked, does the process become more efficient with pre-sorted plastic waste, such as we have in Australia through domestic recycle bins and the subsequent sorting and consolidation at regional material recycling sorting facilities?
Sure. It does make things easier to a certain extent. One, we actually don't want to interrupt current recycling. So I think if something's being recycled, it's good to recycle it. So our target is actually just stuff that's not being recycled. The main benefit of having a particular stream of plastics may be around the quality of fuel that's produced, because a plastic will produce more energy than a piece of wood will. So in that sense, having a certain amount of plastics in the mix is most probably good, because it will increase the calorific value that comes out in fuel. But yeah, we don't want to really interrupt recycling as it is. It's focused on dealing with the contaminated plastics, really.
Great. I've got a question here from Wayne. They've asked, what's the estimated return of investment and how long before you expect returns to commence? I might just quickly cover off here in terms of, for those unfamiliar with crowdsource funding, ASIC does take a firm view about future projections, whether that be product revenue or return on investment. Whether a company intends to pay a dividend in cash or shares will be set out in the company's dividend policy. Many companies that make a CSF offer are new, early stage or rapidly growing ventures, obviously, just like Cyclion. This means many of these companies in the early stages may not be profitable or choose to reinvest any profits back into the business to fund future growth rather than pay those profits to shareholders as dividends. For more information, please carefully review the company's constitution and the CSF offer document for information about their dividend policy. And we obviously recommend you review all company material and read the CSF risk warning when making your decision to invest. Richard has asked, are there environmental risks and liability, and who owns this?
Yeah, so the project owns the responsibility for the project. This is also why we're working with universities, so that there's plenty of evidence. I believe in evidence. I'm a scientist. I like data. And so we are taking a lot of steps to make sure that what we're producing is environmentally friendly. Now, our risks are minimal because we're not using things like acids. We're not at high temperature, high pressure, which have other associations which are challenging. I don't even know if you saw recently even a facility in the UK. There's always risks. They suffered because of a lightning strike. So there are risks associated with anything we do, but there's also risks of not doing anything. In fact, that risk of not doing anything is actually much greater. So we're taking every measure possible to minimise by using environmentally friendly materials, low temperature, low pressure, and working with highly credible universities to make sure that we are positively impacting the environment, not negatively.
Amazing. We've got no further questions from the team, so feel free to put some more in there. I've got a question for each of you. What's each of your proudest moments with Cyclion over the years? I'm sure there's many, but if you could pick one. Maybe Steve, if you want to start.
Proudest moment. Well, I think for me, just the realization that I'd put my effort and my money towards something that's going to help me leave this world feeling better about myself. You know, that's the key one. I mean, I've been an accountant for 20 years. It's hard to sort of pull anything out of that that's really going to help humanity to any great extent, to be fair to all accountants. So that's probably my proudest moment at that point.
Amazing. Phil?
Yeah, I think actually when QUT gave me the results for their testing, which proved this process. And the reason for that is actually both Steve and I are motivated in very similar ways, in the sense that we really do want to make a difference. And the significance of that report was incredible, because it meant that this modular system could be applied to even small countries or nations or islands. So in other words, even regional and remote Australia, I'm very, very keen to get to a stage where we can actually place and empower local communities to not only look after their own waste, but be energy independent. So whether that be fuel or whether that be electricity, employing locals locally, I think this is why I built the technology, and having Steve with me has been invaluable. Seeing from such an early stage the potential and believing in it, even before a lot of this other evidence was there. And the team that we're growing is absolutely incredible. Like even in this crowdsource funding, we've had some really, really good companies working with us, highly motivated to make a difference to the environment. We're very, very fortunate.
Can I just jump in too quickly, sticking my accountant's hat quickly back on? We are a self-assessed asset company as well, a early stage investment company. And so what that can do is can give you significant tax benefits. Rather than go through them here, talk to your accountant. That's the first call. If you want to talk to me, as I said, I'm a registered tax agent as well. I'm authorised to give advice on tax. I'm happy to have a chat to you about that. But if you have an accountant, obviously that'd be the first stop. That can help you. As I say, we're self-assessed and it's not guaranteed, but there's certainly some opportunity there for those of you with tax problems, and don't we all, as investors. So, you know, have a chat if you like.
Amazing. We've got a question here from JF. They've asked, how has the company been funded so far, and can you expect some co-funding from universities for the pilot plant and research?
So in terms of the first part of the question, it's been through Steve and myself, and R&D tax incentives, which are so government support. Going forward, we're actually extending beyond QUT. There'll be 3 universities. In fact, there'll be an announcement next week about one university. So we're extending collaboration with universities, and also University of the Philippines we want to bring in as well. So that enables us to actually apply for, there's various funding available for universities. Also, they're called CRCP or ARC. There's different ones. I've spoken with the universities about this, and we will be applying for them. They take about 6 months to come through though. So they will be applied for, and this crowdsource funding actually really helps us, because we can actually start getting some of this equipment on the way, but it also enables us to use this as a part of our contribution, and the government sort of matches it. So a CRCP, it's normally about 50% is government funded, and 50% is through the company. And also the universities contribute via their research.
Amazing. Well, if we have no further questions, you've got a few minutes left if you want to pop them in. I'll just let everyone know next steps. Oh, we've got a question here from Luigi. I'll hold fire. They've asked, is this process or solution eligible for carbon credits at all?
Another good question. Yes. So one of the things that I'm engaging the universities to do is a life cycle analysis. And so that will show, but if you, for those who don't know what a life cycle analysis is, it actually takes into account even how far waste needs to be transported either to a tip or to a MRF, or as in a station, and it accumulates all the carbon all to the point that something is delivered to a customer. So it makes a whole assessment. And with especially the algae absorbing the CO2 and the carbon and just releasing the oxygen, that will have a massive, massive impact. So yes, carbon credits will be another incredible benefit for the projects.
Amazing. Not a question, but a comment from Damien. They've said, thank you, very informative. JF has asked, it appears to me that both of you are not chemists. Who are the scientists in Cyclion?
So I've got a biomedical science degree, so I'm not I haven't done a chemistry degree, but it was certainly part of the degree. So I am very familiar with that. I've also, people often ask me, are you an engineer? I'm not an engineer either. And yet I've designed foundation systems in the UK, which is going 15 years later. So I like to think that I've got a bit of common sense, understand a little bit about physics and chemistry, and I've been able to design things successfully and get patents in the past. So yeah, I think for me, it's chemistry makes sense to me, physics makes sense to me, and so I'm actually more the technical person, which you can most probably tell. I go into a bit too much detail when I'm answering people's questions. So apologies if I've bored you or lost you at points.
Not at all.
But yeah, I'm more of the technical person, and I'm grateful for working with great professors as well at the universities.
And you can dive into the team behind Cyclion on their Birchal profile as well, everyone. And earlier in the presentation, Phil shared, and you can see them on the screen here as well. So there's, I can certainly testify that there's a great team behind the business. So Julia's asked, what land size would typically be required for a site to produce 50 tonnes per day? And do you envisage these could be co-located with existing waste recovery centres in the future?
I'll answer the second one first again. So yes, I think co-location is really good. 50 tonnes a day is actually only a small area, but I'd prefer to give you the variations is not just the washing machine size, it's what we need to do with it. So to convert it into oil, that actually doesn't need a big size. That could be even like 6 40-foot containers. But the question is, what do you do with that oil once it's produced? So if you then need to separate it, that can have an impact on what else is required. If I use the project that we're looking at in the Philippines, and that's towards 900 tonnes a day, and it's about a 6-hectare site, but that's a facility that will do everything. So not only receiving the waste, processing the waste, and separating, refining, and distributing.
Amazing. We've got a question here as well from Wayne. They've asked, what's the minimum investment you'll be looking for from investors? I'd encourage you to express interest if you haven't already. The offer will be going live shortly, not next week, the week after. So do keep your eyes peeled on your email for information about that. And the minimum investment will be included in the offer document when that becomes available when we open the offer. And we've got a final comment here from JF. They've said, thank you, looking forward to the next stage. Thank you from Birchal to you all for joining. It's honestly such a joy to share the word of the amazing companies that we get to support through our platform. And hear directly from the investors as well. So thank you all for your time. I'll hand over to Phil and Stephen to say their thank yous and sign us off for the day. Again, we'll be sharing this recording, so please circulate it with your friends, family, network. If anyone wasn't able to attend, spread the word, and of course, keep your eyes peeled for when the offer goes live.
Thanks, everyone. I've really enjoyed the last hour. Thanks to Anna and Birchal again. Done a fantastic job with our campaign, and I'd highly recommend them if you think about raising. And thanks to my wonderful co-founder, Philip, as well.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. I look forward to being with you, whether it's an investment or just supporting. We value what you do, and value the time that you've gone up to listen to us today, and hope that you'll join us on this journey. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.